Blessings and peace, beloved. Thank you for joining us once again for our Great Controversy Devotional series, where we are using the book Christ Triumphant that deals with the issues pertaining to this great struggle between Christ and Satan. The devotional thought for us for today, May the 29th, is entitled, Leaders with Various Talents Are Needed in God's Church. And the scripture reading is 1 Chronicles chapters 28 and verse 8. Keep and seek for all the commandments of the Lord your God, that ye may possess this good land and leave it for an inheritance for your children after you forever. The last great work of David in his official position was to call the attention of the people once more to their solemn relation to God as subjects of his theocracy. Fidelity to God is required for the reception of the blessings that he has promised to impart to all who obey his instruction. So if we're not faithful to God, we do not receive the blessings. All who are accepted in his service are required to do his commandments. So obedience brings the blessings. If with heart and mind and soul they do his holy will, they become representatives of his kingdom. So those who represent God are only those who are all in, that he views as his representatives. So if you're not all in, fully unreserved and surrendered to Christ, you can't represent God. David's solemn charge should be kept in mind by those who are in positions of trust today, for it is as verily binding upon these people as it was upon Solomon at the time it was given. In this our day of probation, God's people are being tested and tried as surely as they were in the days of Solomon. The whole chapter of 1 Chronicles 28 is of importance to all the people of God living in this age. So that's an important passage, 1 Chronicles 28. God's service is not committed to one person's judgment and opinion and option. No one controls the work of God. You know that? You know that the church does not control the work of God. The General Conference does not control the work of God. The church has been established to help the work of God. We don't direct it. The Spirit of God directs the work of God. The General Conference is to help and co-labor together with Christ in executing and prosecuting the work of God. We are co-laborers. We don't work for God. We work along with God. The church doesn't work for God. The church works along with God. All right? And so, and this is critical for us to understand. There's a difference between working for God and working along with God, because in working for God, you can be working for yourself, your own selfish aims, plans, and ambitions. But in working along with God, you are following God's plan alone and God's plan only. And you are working with him for him to accomplish his plans. So do you understand the critical difference? So we don't work for God. We work along with God. And when we are working for God, God's work goes forward, and we are working for him and not doing his work. That's crazy, isn't it? We can be working for God and not doing his work because we don't understand. We're on the baptism of John and he's on the baptism of Jesus. So that work will still always be incomplete. So we are to work along with God. We are to be co-laborers together with God. For when we are co-laborers, we are following his directions and his blueprint. God's service is not committed to one person's judgment and option, but it is divided among those who are willing to labor interestedly and self-sacrificingly. Thus all according to the skill. So those who are willing to labor, so regardless, beloved, God uses and works with those who are working with him interestedly or disinterestedly and self-sacrificingly. They're not working for their own self-interest. They're working for God's plans. Thus all according to the skill and ability God has given them, bear the responsibilities that he has appointed them. So we can only do the work that we are appointed to do. This is why we are told, go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Every ant does his job that God has intended it for it to do. The important interests of a great nation were entrusted to leaders whose talents fitted them to handle these responsibilities. And this is key. So we should not put people in positions of trust and responsibility because they are our family or they belong to our group or they are of our ideas. You put people in positions of trust in God's church who can bear that responsibility. Because then when we put them in a position for them to bear, a position of responsibility for them to bear because they are our friend and they identify with us and not because they are fitted for the task, we are held responsible for God for the lack of success and for the potential that was not met or realized. We are guilty. So how many church boards are guilty, beloved? We are guilty. When we choose to put people in positions of trust and responsibility because they are our friend, they are in our clique and they are our family, and we want our family to be we want our family to be in control because we know how to do it best. Oh yes, the judgment of God will wait not and linger not upon you. And this is the fact of God's work. When you put those in power who don't belong there, you are responsible for the things that they do. Some were chosen to direct the business affairs. Others were chosen to look after spiritual matters connected with the worship of God. All the religious service and every branch of the business was to bear the signature of heaven. So you can do missionary work in church office. You can do missionary work in your business. You can work with God in your management ability. Whether you're managing in a business or you're managing the work of God or you're managing the affairs of the church, you can work with God because God has blessed you with a gift. You working within your gift is you giving God service. That's your offering. So do it, beloved. Some were chosen to direct the business affairs. Others were chosen to look after spiritual matters connected with the worship of God. All the religious service and every branch of the business was to bear the signature of heaven. So if a pastor does not know how to manage things, he should not be placed in a position of management. If a pastor does not know how to manage business effects of the church, business enterprises of the church, he should not be placed there. All the religious service and every branch of the business was to bear the signature of heaven. Holiness unto the Lord was to be the motto of the laborers in every department. And it is not meat, beloved. You need people consecrated to doing things God's way. That does not mean that they have to be a pastor in order to manage the church's business affairs. So this linear thinking that we have, this narrow thinking that we have in the conference, where you must be a pastor in order to work in this particular field. No. Business, let the businessmen be businessmen so that the work of God will always have means. But because we want a pastor to do the businessman's work, the work of God is suffering for means because he's not doing a great job. He's doing an all right job. He's doing an okay job. He's doing an passable, barely. But he's not a businessman. But what about the faith? No, if that businessman is consecrated to God and maintains his connection to God, let him run the business aspects of the church. But you see, we are seeking power and control and not service to God. So we are where we are. Holiness unto the Lord was to be the motto of the laborers in every department. It was regarded as essential with everything. It was, and this is key. Once that person is consecrated, they can, what we want is compliance. What we always look for is compliance. So we put people in positions of trust who we know is going to comply and follow our agenda. But our agenda is not always right. We don't always see things from God's perspective. And so therefore it's good when people, in the honesty of principle, say, no, I object because that would not be right. And so therefore, we kind of think that we are the ones that keep the wheels turning. It is Christ, not us. When we are dedicated to holiness and unreserved consecration, the wheels keep turning regardless of how it may appear. Because God always has subject matter, willing subject matter that he is able to use to keep the work going forward. So if your mind is controlling the work and everybody is marching to the beat of your drum, but then you make a mistake, then you are causing things to go awry. You see why it is necessary, like Abraham Lincoln, to put people in positions of trust that don't necessarily agree with you to keep you objective and true to principle. It was Holiness unto the Lord was to be the motto of the laborers in every department. It was regarded as essential that everything be conducted with regularity, propriety, fidelity, and dispatch. To all who are engaged in his service, the Lord gives wisdom. The tabernacle to be born in the wilderness and the temple at Jerusalem were built in accordance with special directions from God. In the very beginning, he was particular as to the design and the accomplishment of his work. In this age of the world, he has given his people much light and instruction in regard to how his work is to be carried forward on an elevated, refined, ennobling basis, where we carry forward his work with regularity, propriety, fidelity, and dispatch. God's work is only carried forward by using God's blueprint. No other way. So all the times that we don't use God's blueprint, we don't meet with success. There's apparent victories, but in reality they are not. They become stumbling blocks and further delays to the work of God, because we can't do God's work using the devil's methods. We can't overcome like that. We can only overcome by following God's directions. Blessings and peace.